Emile had always been a man with a taste for the morbid. In every new town he visited, he sought out the haunted houses, the derelict buildings rumored to harbor ghosts, and the hushed roads lined with twisted trees that locals feared to visit after dark. So when he heard chatter of a lost carnival that emerged from the gloaming on certain nights, only to vanish like mist with the morning sun, his interest was immediately piqued. The stories, whispered by old-timers at the local tavern, were always the same. At the stroke of midnight, the deserted carnival grounds would flicker with unnatural lights. The carousel would spin, the Ferris wheel would turn, and distant laughter would echo across the tattered tents. According to rumor, the carnival was caught in some unholy loop, attracting the souls of the curious and unwary to join in its grisly revelry. He arrived in a small town on a moonless evening, sure that his unusual hobby had led him to the right place, or, depending on one's perspective, the worst possible place at the worst possible time. The locals had insisted the old carnival grounds were somewhere down a deserted highway, far beyond where streetlights ended. The blacktop gave way to a dirt path, and that path wound through skeletal trees and dried reeds, until eventually it reached a clearing. Emile found himself staring down the rotting remains of a tall wooden archway. The faded lettering overhead was broken. Several planks had fallen off, leaving only half the word Carnival. A rickety chain-link fence stood open, as if waiting for him to step inside. Though he had an uneasy feeling in his stomach, he tried to stoke his excitement. He was no stranger to unusual phenomena, but rarely did he come across a legend so vividly described in local lore. He parked his dusty sedan off to the side, grabbed a small flashlight from the glove compartment, and approached the open gate. Weeds and nettles clung to the fence and around the base of the arch. A single rotted ticket booth, its window glass shattered, appeared just beyond. The air was still, not even a breeze to rustle the tall grass or the tattered banners that drooped from poles thicker than his arm. Beyond the booth he saw shapes in the gloom rides that had surely not operated in decades, silent and decaying. He cast one last glance at his phone, 11:24 p.m. The stories warned that everything began at midnight. The primal part of his brain told him to turn back, that he had flirted with danger enough, but curiosity got the better of him, and, to be honest, so did a sense of perverse excitement. If there truly was a carnival come midnight, he wanted to see it with his own eyes. He wanted to hear that eerie laughter bounce off the night sky. And so he walked in, each step rattling along the uneven ground. An almost palpable hush settled around him. The soil under his feet felt moist, even though there hadn't been rain for weeks. Probably just dew, he murmured to himself, searching for logical explanations to quell the building tension in his chest. He wandered closer to a rusted Ferris wheel. Its fluorescent lights had long since burned out, leaving only spider webs and bits of shattered glass in the sockets. A sign hammered into the side read, "Thrill of the Town," in flaking red paint. The seats hung motionless, their seatbelts dangling as if waiting for the next riders who would never come. Faded carnival posters along the boards depicted the smiling faces of performers, contortionists, and men in top hats brandishing canes. Time had washed out their features, reducing them to nearly blank silhouettes. Emile felt a twinge of sadness. He could imagine children and families once flocking here, squealing and laughing through a swirl of cotton candy and bright lights. As the minutes slipped by, he proceeded deeper into the heart of the carnival, noticing a wide circle of attractions converging around a central performance tent. Rusted rides, chipped paint, and rotting wooden stalls gave the place the look of a forsaken graveyard of amusements. He paused at a small stand that might have once served popcorn or candy apples. Bits of moldy straw and scraps of paper still clung to the floor. Underneath layers of dust, a once bright painting of a clown's face grinned at him in a grotesque, welcoming gesture. Emile leaned in, studying the clown's eyes. Even in a static image, they seemed to hold a secret. He got the uncomfortable notion that the painted clown was looking back at him, sizing him up. He shuddered and moved on, gripping his flashlight so tightly his knuckles turned white. Only a few minutes to midnight, he figured. The hush that had settled around the carnival now felt oppressive, as though the night itself was holding its breath, awaiting some dark metamorphosis. Then, just as his phone read 11:59, the ground seemed to tremble. It was so subtle at first that he thought it might be his imagination, but the vibrations gathered strength until small pebbles danced on the ground. Emil's heart pounded. He braced himself against a beam of one of the battered rides, scanning the area for any sign of what was happening. Suddenly, at the exact moment his phone ticked from 11:59 to 12:00, the lights on the Ferris wheel blazed to life. He jolted in alarm and spun around, shining his flashlight on the giant wheel, which had been lifeless just a moment before. Electric bulbs flickered erratically at first, then settled into a warm, gaudy glow. The seats began to sway, as though an unseen hand tested their readiness. A tinny calliope melody drifted across the night air, distant at first but growing louder, played presumably by an organ that had no right to be operational. It was a childish tune, once joyous, but now corrupted by the disorienting ring of disembodied echoes. Emil's pulse quickened, a mix of terror and electrifying fascination. One by one, the other rides lurched to life. The carousel's rickety horses rose and fell in slow, stilted grace. Fluorescent lights flickered on battered bulbs around its crown, and the battered roller coaster rattled as if possessed by an angry ghost. The smell of scorched metal and old grease wafted through the air. What frightened him most was the laughter light, echoing giggles that seemed to come from the corners where no one stood. Threaded through the carnival breeze, it gave him goosebumps. It was too faint to place, yet it rang with such clarity when it came that it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He looked back over his shoulder. The archway was still visible. Could he simply run back to his car and leave? Yes, he thought, that would be the sensible thing to do. But a powerful curiosity held him still. As his apprehension warred with his morbid fascination, a flicker of movement at the corner of his vision caught his eye. A silhouette stood in the shadow of the Ferris wheel. Emil lifted his flashlight and aimed it that way. For a second, he feared he might see a demonic figure. Instead, it appeared to be a man in a ringmaster's uniform, perched on the edge of a parted curtain that seemed to lead nowhere. The ringmaster's outfit was old-fashioned. He wore a tattered long coat, complete with gold epaulets, and a red tailcoat with ruffles at the cuffs, but his face was cast in shadow beneath a top hat. Emil swallowed, gathered what courage he had, and stepped closer. "Hello?" he called, voice trembling slightly. The ringmaster's figure didn't move, at least not at first. Then the head slowly turned, as if on a pivot to fix an eyeless gaze upon him. Emil froze in mid-step. The ringmaster's face, though half hidden in darkness, wore a smile that did not reach his eyes. Indeed, there were no eyes to see, only black hollows. He raised a pale hand, beckoned silently, and then whirled around, passing through the parted curtain and disappearing into the darkness beyond. In some bizarre trance, Emil followed. His flashlight beam cut through swirling dust motes, illuminating an alleyway of leaning tents and rotting wagons that must have once carried carnival supplies. The calliope music grew louder, though it seemed to warp and slow, sometimes buzzing with static. And everywhere he walked, the rides continued to move, as if guided by invisible riders. Although fear gnawed at his chest, this carnival was like a puzzle. If he could unravel its sinister secret, perhaps he might free himself from the sense of doom that hovered over him like a vulture. With each step, the general lights around him brightened in pattern, shifting from red to green to orange, all in unnatural sequences. He arrived before a striped tent that seemed slightly less decrepit than the rest. Its red and white canvas was flecked with stains, and from the open flap came the aroma of rotting sweets, an overwhelming smell that stuck to his nostrils. Something inside told him he shouldn't enter, but he felt compelled, as if an invisible chain drew him onward. The interior was sparsely lit with swinging lanterns that gave off an eerie, pale luminescence. Each gust of wind made them sway, casting dancing shadows into corners that refused to be fully illuminated. Rows of bleachers surrounded a central ring, as if for acrobats or jugglers. Yet the ring lay empty, the sawdust floor marred by footprints that seemed fresh but led nowhere. In the stands, silent figures sat with their heads bowed. Emil's flashlight flicked across them, and horror clenched his chest. They were mannequins, dressed in tattered carnival attire, each with blank porcelain faces and painted-on eyes. They might have once been a charming display, but now they appeared more like an audience of the deceased. A single clown figure stood in the center ring, holding a balloon in one hand. Its head was turned downward. When Emil took a step forward, the clown jerked its head up. Painted lips curved into a grin, and the balloon popped without warning, releasing a ghostly hiss. Something rustled in the stands. One of the mannequins was moving, not merely rocking from a breeze, but turning its porcelain head to regard him. Emil felt cold sweat trickle down his temples. There was no logical explanation for any of this, yet logic had abandoned him the moment the carnival roared to life under the midnight moon. He wanted to scream, but was unsure if it would do any good. Taking a shaky breath, he backed away, but the ringmaster was there, behind him, blocking his exit with unnatural grace, as though he had materialized from the shadows. The ringmaster's hollow eye sockets seemed to bore into Emil, as if reading the frantic pounding of his heart. Without speaking, the ringmaster gestured for him to gaze upward. Emil's neck went rigid, but he forced himself to follow that silent directive. At the top of the tent, suspended by trapeze wires, hung a figure in a torn performer's uniform, a woman with trailing ribbons for arms. She floated in the gloom, drifting close to the tent's apex, with no visible support. Suddenly, the woman's eyes snapped open, revealing empty sockets not unlike the ringmaster's. Emil stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a wooden hoop, yet he couldn't tear his gaze away from those featureless eyes. The figure's mouth distended in a silent scream, then its entire body contorted as if pulled by invisible strings. Before he could entirely process this horror, a swirl of dust and fabric enveloped him. He shielded his face, lost in a blizzard of ancient canvas, as if the tent itself had come alive. When he managed to steady himself, he found that the ringmaster was gone, and so was the trapeze woman. The eerie mannequins remained, still gazing blankly in his direction. Realizing he might be trapped if he stayed, he bolted from the tent, kicking up clouds of stale sawdust behind him. Outside, the carnival had grown even more chaotic. The rides swerved faster, their lights intensifying. The Ferris wheel spun at a dizzying pace, seats rattling dangerously on their hinges. Broken carnival music now overlapped with echoes of laughter, tears, and screams, as if hundreds of voices all clamored for release at once. He stumbled across the path to where a cluster of game booths stood. Stuffed toys with gaping holes in their torsos were splayed on the counters, their button eyes rolling around as though they were alive. Painted targets in the shooting gallery flickered in and out of existence, at times showing ragged bullet holes and at others appearing brand new. A sign overhead read, "Lucky Shots," but the paint dripped as if it were fresh blood. He turned away, desperately scanning for the exit. The archway that led out seemed impossibly far, and in the shifting shadows cast by strobe-like lights, he saw more figures creeping between the rides. Some looked like the living, but with vacant stares. Others drifted in mid-air, recognizable only by their faint outline. A prickling at his neck warned him he was being watched again. It seemed every corner, every twisted shape, every flicker of light concealed new watchers. Suddenly he caught movement in a nearby booth filled with misshapen mirrors. The sign outside read, "Hall of Mirrors. Enter if you dare." A swirl of carnival lights illuminated the interior. He saw his own reflection for a moment, a trembling figure with dark hair askew and wide, fearful eyes. But then his reflection vanished, replaced by a clown's face, grotesque and stretched, with elongated features that made it look half human, half demon. He stifled a horrified gasp and turned away, but the carnival seemed to herd him toward that booth, leaving him with no other path. He pressed forward, stepping inside. The warped reflection in the first mirror now showed him as a pale, emaciated skeleton, hunched and draped in rags. The next mirror rendered him faceless. Where his features should have been, there was only blank, colorless skin. He pressed a hand to his real cheek, reassured that he still had a mouth and nose, but the reflection insisted otherwise. The third mirror showed him surrounded by flickering ghosts, each with outstretched arms, while the ringmaster stood behind him, leaning in close enough to whisper in his ear. Emil whirled around, heart pounding, but the corridor was empty, except for the labyrinth of reflections. He advanced past mirror after mirror, each reflection more disturbing than the last, a carnival masked in flames, scorched mannequins, and swirling ashes. All illusions, he told himself. But that didn't calm his rattled nerves. Then something cold grazed the back of his neck. He turned abruptly, expecting an attacker, but what he saw was even worse. His own reflection in one of the warped mirrors, only this time he wasn't alone. The ringmaster stood behind him, eyes two dark voids, that manic grin twisting the corners of his narrow face. When Emil turned to look behind him in real life, the ringmaster was there, silent, an arm's length away. He let out an involuntary cry and stumbled backward, colliding with another mirror. Its glass splintered with a hideous crack, and a cold current of air brushed across his legs from the gap behind it. A hidden passage opened in the shattered mirror, half revealing a twisting corridor of old wood. Something in the gloom beyond beckoned him. Perhaps it was the only way out. Without thinking, he ducked through that broken pane, shards scraping his arms. He emerged into a series of narrow walkways, lit overhead by flickering bulbs that fluttered like dying fireflies. A rancid smell assaulted him. Decomposition, possibly, or mold and stagnant water. The ringmaster, if he had followed, was nowhere to be seen. As Emil proceeded, he felt watched by unseen eyes. Metallic, scraping noises traveled along the corridor walls. He heard whimpers in the distance, or perhaps merely echoes of the carnival's illusions. The corridor emptied into a hidden backstage area. Old, torn costumes hung from nails. A pair of dusty stage lights pointed at a tattered red curtain. In the corner lay crates marked "Prop Master," one of them pried open. Inside lay half-rotten marionettes, each with eyes that looked unnervingly real. A battered show poster pinned to a rotting board displayed the ringmaster's image front and center, proclaiming "The Grand Midnight Show." The date on the poster was from decades ago. He'd heard something about the carnival's abrupt closure. Stories said a fire or a disastrous accident had claimed many lives, but no official record confirmed it, only legends. Another faint tremor rattled the floor, and a gust of stale wind parted the curtains. Beyond them lay a deeper darkness. Taking a shaky breath, he pulled aside the curtain and stepped into another tent. This one was smaller, less grand. In the center stood a dusty stage with a single wooden chair, leaning precariously. A spotlight from above flickered on, illuminating the chair. Slowly, as if compelled, Emil approached. Drips of water or some other liquid fell from above, landing in puddles that reflected the flickering spotlight. He had the sense that something or someone was about to appear on that stage. A final twisted performance. Suddenly, the ringmaster was there again, stepping from the shadows into the spotlight, but he wasn't alone. Behind him drifted the horse-like shapes of carousel beasts, their eyes glowing with a faint, spectral shimmer. The ringmaster opened his mouth, but rather than speak words, he released a horrible, discordant laughter. That laughter reverberated throughout the tent, echoing endlessly until Emil felt it vibrating in his skull. Then, with studied slowness, the ringmaster extended one white-gloved hand toward the chair, inviting Emil to sit. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to reject the invitation to run, but he couldn't move. His legs felt pinned to the spot, as though an invisible force had claimed them. He stood there, immobilized, while the ringmaster's faceless grin stretched. From the darkness behind him emerged the shapes of silent onlookers. Carnival performers from days gone by, each with those hollow eyes. Painted acrobats, stilt-walkers, skeleton-faced clowns, all forming a semicircle around the stage, entrapping Emil in this spotlight. The ringmaster's laughter merged with the incessant carnival music, creating a macabre harmony that threatened to drive him mad. He closed his eyes, trying to block it all out, trying to gather the strength to will his legs to move. Then, in a brief hush, he heard whispering. At first he couldn't distinguish voices, but soon they clarified into pleas for help, moans of agony, and anxious wails. "Set us free," a child's voice sobbed. "Don't let them keep us here," cried an older voice. Emil's eyes shot open. He realized that these souls, these undead performers, were trapped. The carnival had claimed them for its nightly haunt. Perhaps they'd been drawn in by curiosity, just as he was, only to find themselves locked in an eternal midnight. If that was true, there had to be a way to break the cycle. Mustering all his courage, Emil glared at the ringmaster. He had read about spirits tethered to cursed objects or places. Maybe the ringmaster was the axis of this entire spectacle. The carnival's heart, its puppet master. If that was the case, confronting him might be the only way out. He swallowed hard, forcing words up from his dry throat. "I won't be your next victim," he croaked, though his voice trembled. The ringmaster's grin faltered for half a heartbeat. The spectral carnival watchers around them swayed, as if unsettled. Something about confronting the ringmaster's authority had changed the dynamic, ever so slightly. Emil took a shaky step forward, fighting the invisible heaviness that pinned his limbs. The ringmaster twitched, opening his mouth in that horrifying silent scream, and the laughter abruptly died. A fierce wind blew through the tent, tearing at the canvas and whipping up dust. Overhead light bulbs shattered with a series of pops, plunging the scene into near total darkness, save for flickers from the strobe lights outside. In those flashes, he saw the ringmaster flicker too, his form changing from solid to translucent. The captive souls murmured, some of them reaching toward Emil, their eyes imploring him to break the carnival's hold. Fueled by adrenaline and desperation, he lunged at the ringmaster. His hands plunged into cold emptiness, like reaching into icy water. The ringmaster's form collapsed into swirling shadows that whipped around Emil's wrists, rising above him to reform once more. Then the ringmaster hissed, an awful rattle that sounded like wind in a crypt. He pointed a bony finger at Emil, and in a blink, the illusions in the tent changed. The cursed rides appeared around them, orbiting the scene. Fires danced on the roller coaster tracks, while the Ferris wheel completed a ghostly rotation overhead, seats filled with phantoms that wailed in unison. Emil refused to be overwhelmed. He drew upon his sense of compassion for the voices he'd heard, the old caretaker's moan, the child's plea. They deserved release, just as he deserved survival. He lunged for the ringmaster again, this time grabbing hold of that red tailcoat. It felt solid now, surprisingly. The ringmaster shrieked in protest, his hollow eye sockets narrowing. A wave of invisible force knocked Emil back, sending him toppling onto the dusty floor. But as he fell, he caught hold of a handful of the ringmaster's coat. The fabric tore away in his grip. A stream of noxious black smoke poured from the tear. Sparks of light erupted around them, as though the carnival's very fabric had been ripped open. Laughter turned to agonized screams. The swirling illusions flickered. Patterns of lights blinked out. Emil sensed that something fundamental to the carnival's unholy binding had been shattered. The ringmaster howled, stumbling, his form tattering at the edges. Triumphant, Emil scrambled to his feet, ignoring the ferocious wind that whipped at his face. He half ran, half limped toward the carnival's entrance, weaving through the battered rides. All around him, the carnival seemed to be unraveling like a twisted tapestry. Ferris wheel seats snapped free of their hinges and plummeted to the earth, bursting into sparks of pure darkness on impact. The carousel animals let out haunting final whinnies before collapsing into piles of rotted wood. He sprinted past the boarded-up concessions, the rotting clown posters, and the leaning ticket booth. That open chain-link gate was in sight. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The ringmaster, drifting amid black smoke, reached out an arm in one last attempt to seize him. But a sudden swirl of prismatic light enveloped the carnival as if the entire structure were folding in on itself. Translucent shapes rose into the air like wisps' souls, freed at last from their torment. They soared upward, disappearing into the moonless sky. For a moment, Emile could have sworn he saw them smile at him in silent gratitude before they vanished. Emile crossed the threshold out of the carnival grounds just as the entire place dissolved behind him in a spiral of darkness and faint sparks. He collapsed on the dirt path, breathing heavily. The archway had already vanished, leaving behind only an empty stretch of field and wire-thin trees swaying in the night wind. There was no sign any carnival had ever been there. The air felt lighter, and the hush of the surroundings was pure, free of the oppressive gloom. Still shaking, he crawled back to where he'd left his car. Yet it wasn't in the same spot. At first he thought it was gone. Then he realized it lay just a few yards away, caked in dust and surrounded by overgrown weeds, as if it had been sitting there for years. He managed to pry open the door and slump into the driver's seat. When he tried to start the engine, it sputtered, as if reluctant to come back to life. On the third try, it finally roared to life. He wasted no time turning back toward town. Night pressed in from either side of the deserted road. He half expected the carnival to reappear in his rearview mirror, haunted lights rising behind him. But there was nothing, only the quiet stretch of highway. In time, he reached the dim outskirts of the town. The comforting glow of street lamps reminded him that he was back in the realm of the living. He parked near the tavern where he had first heard the rumors, though he wasn't sure what he would say if anyone asked about his disheveled state. Exhaustion overwhelmed him. Inside the tavern, he found only silence and locked doors. Closing time had come and gone. Slack-faced, he slumped against the hood of his car, letting the cool night breeze wash over him. His watch declared it was 12:45 a.m. Though he couldn't comprehend the time warping, he knew he had stared into the face of a nightmare made real. The carnival might reappear someday, maybe in another forlorn corner of the world, waiting for the next inquisitive soul. Had he truly defeated it, or only driven it deeper into the shadows of midnight? He remembered the swirl of freed spirits, their near smiles, and told himself that at least some part of that cursed realm had been lifted. Perhaps the ringmaster's control was weakened, the cycle broken, even if not entirely ended. For his own sanity, he decided to believe that. The memory of that sickening laughter and hollow-eyed grin would haunt him for the rest of his life. But with it came the knowledge that sometimes a single act of bravery could reclaim hope from the jaws of despair. Though shaken to his core, Emile became determined to use his experience as a cautionary tale for anyone else drawn to the carnival's legend. He would warn them about the midnight laughter and the ringmaster's beckoning grin, urging them not to be lured in by curiosity or cheap thrills. The next day, once the sun rose and the illusions had long boiled away in the morning light, he left town, heart thumping in quiet but resolute relief. He was free, and if ever again he felt that creeping pull toward forgotten places with ominous reputations, he would remember how close he had come to eternal imprisonment in that forsaken carnival. The memory of midnight's horrors had scorched into his mind, ensuring he would never again take lightly the lure of eerie laughter in the dark.